powerful technique that comes from the 1930s called preference theory. But in fact, it's usually in most of the universities in North America, I don't really know about Europe, but most universities in North America, you don't do this. It's too sophisticated for that. U of T has always done this because it's really not that sophisticated. And it's a very powerful technique that you should know in economics. It's highly abstract, but ultimately you see that it's not that abstract. So what we do there is we put together what we call the difference curves and budget lines, and that's what we're going to get into. But before we get to that, I want to get to a kind of preamble, how the demand curve was first found, right? Okay, so, and this is very intuitive, and this is the way it's normally taught. In fact, it's the main part of your textbook. The chapter on derivation of demand is this way, and difference curves and budget lines is only the appendix. But this way is junk, really. It's good intuition. But economically, or like as a kind of fundamental logic and as a basis of analysis, it's pure and utter junk. And it's not really applicable beyond economics, whereas the technique we learn is good for any kind of choice, particular political choice. So political scientists need to use this kind of stuff, okay? So, here's what happened. We talked a little bit. The classical economists denied that demand had any influence in the time that they were interested in. And in the 1870s, in fact in 1871, I think it was, 71, I think it was 71, two guys, one was named Jevons in England, and the other named Menger in Austria, basically wrote the same theory. One guy, the English guy, used calculus and thought of continuous functions, and the other guy had no clue about calculus and he used tables. Other than that, there's very little difference between them. It's virtually the same idea. And what they did was basically get a method to show how you would get an equilibrium price with no cost, only through exchange. And this, by the way, almost every modern economist has this as a part of them. You scratch them ultimately, this is who they are. They're margin utility people, despite all the sophistication and such good stuff. I'm not, because I'm into cost, and I couldn't care less about supply demand, right? So, but no matter. And yet, even I know from Marshall, of course, it's important. So here's the deal. What they did, the classical economists had said, I don't know if we talk about the Water-Diamond paradox here? Oh, they had said this, and this is important. It may not seem important to you in the way, this won't be in a final exam, but it's very important to understand the logic and how people try to figure things out for hundreds of years and couldn't get there. They said, what they would say was, they said, look, this is a mouse. It is used for computers, that's what it is. This is a coffee, it is used to drink. This mouse is 30 times exchanges. You need 30 of these to get one mouse. Here's my question to you. This is the classical economists. The use value, the physical use, has nothing to do with the exchange value. Has nothing to do with it. So the use value, there's two things. Everything, a mouse has a use value. It's a mouse, it does this and that. And it has an exchange value. It's worth 30 times this. But the use value would never tell you what they were like. In fact, if I brought a person who really didn't know what was going on in the world in here, and I said, now tell me, for example, I had a 50-inch TV in the wall here. The thing is worth $1,000, because when they saw that thing, and they looked at it, they my God, look what it can do. It's unreal, what is it? And then they had a plumber come and fix some pipe in the washroom. For a day, it would cost $1,000. And I would say, look, this plumber using a primitive wrench and hacking away with a hammer, this guy costs $1,000 and it's finished, goes away with the pipe breaking in. That thing in the wall is the same price. Oh my God, how is that possible? This thing in the wall has TV shows from all over the place that show anything, and has Wi-Fi, blah, blah, blah. The thing is unreal, it's huge. They would be amazed. And this plumber is like using techniques from the Stone Age, right? But they're both $1,000. So they say the use value, what the thing is irrelevant. Exchange value is therefore determined by cost, isn't it? The plumber costs $1,000. That thing costs $1,000. Story over, forget about demand. And furthermore, they use the water diamond paradox. Water, the second most important thing in human life after oxygen, you couldn't live more than 3 days without it. I can go to the washroom there and get water for free, anytime I want. A diamond, possibly the most useless thing on earth, flashy little thing, $1,000 for a stupid little diamond. So they said, look, what's the relationship between price and use? Diamond is useless, $1,000. Water is tremendously useful, nothing. Cost is the difference, right? Forget demand then, totally relevant. Okay. In fact, I had a student who once said, well, wait a minute. You know, people like diamonds, and because they like diamonds, they want to buy diamonds, and then for that reason, diamonds are $1,000. But actually, the classical economists said, don't be silly. It's because diamonds cost $1,000 to produce that people like them, right? They're rare. They cost $1,000. That's why they have them, not the other way around, right? Cost. Okay, good. So that just prevailed to the 1870s. And this guy, Jevons, and Mager, another guy, French guy, Belgian actually, Val Ross in 1874, and Marshall, by the way, all by himself, but never published this stuff. They all came up to an explanation that attacked the conception of utility by these classical economists. They said, look, they're wrong. What's important is not the physical use of the mouse, it's how much I want the thing. It's the satisfaction I get from the mouse. Just like this coffee here. It's the satisfaction I get from the coffee. If you don't like coffee, it's got nothing to do with the coffee as a physical thing. It's how much I like it. Somebody who likes tea wouldn't pay 2 cents for a coffee. Somebody who liked this coffee might pay $50 for it. That's the key. It's subjective. Utility is subjective. It depends upon the satisfaction a person gets or expects to get, their desire for it. Right? So that's number one. Number two, utility is not constant, which is what the classical economists more or less assume. The use of a chair is the same whether it's this chair or another chair. The use value, the utility of the thing, its subjective value changes. I might pay $50 for my first coffee of the day, but I'm certainly not paying $50 for the second one, because the satisfaction I get from it is less. I might pay $40, and this is the greatest coffee in the world. And my third coffee in a day, I'm not paying $40 because I get less satisfaction. I'm paying $30. And my fifth coffee, I'm paying $10. And after I've had like my seventh coffee, which I might have paid $1 for, I don't want another coffee. It would make me sick. I've had too much coffee in the day. So for them, the marginal utility declines. So Jevons did this. And this is like a real breakthrough. He drew this. Now this is a diagram, one of the first diagrams in the whole of economics. Basically, he drew something like this. Where on this axis he put MU. Actually, this, for him he called it final degree of utility. We now call it marginal utility. That's the utility from the next unit you get. Say it's an orange. And this is the quantity in Q for an individual. So let's just see. If I was to buy an orange, now I'm not even going to, there's a problem here, I'm going to leave that for a moment. If I was going to buy an orange, I might get a satisfaction from the orange. Now notice this is important, a satisfaction from my first orange of 10, say, of 10. So one orange might be this. This is the first orange. That's that point. Now here I'm doing it not as a continuous function, but as points. Then in my second orange, actually I might only get a satisfaction for my second orange of 6. Actually, hang on a second. But this is my second orange, so I gotta shove this thing over here. And I might only, if I had a third orange, I might only get a satisfaction of 4, right? And then if I had another orange, I might get a satisfaction of the fourth orange, something like a 2. And then the fifth orange, I might just not really like at all. I get no satisfaction from it. And if I had another orange, I'd probably be sick. Right? This would happen. You say you like oranges, let's start. The satisfaction, the utility you get from an orange declines with the number of oranges. Now, if we do it on a diagram like that, and Maynard can do it on a diagram with tables, because you can do a diagram. This is one of the first diagrams in economics, literally 1871. There's a few others, but they're not. But because this guy in calculus, continuous functions, he just drew it in like this as a smooth function, as a smooth function that looks something like, say, there. And he called it marginal utility. And he came up with this phrase, diminishing marginal utility. The more you have of something, the less satisfaction you get from it. All right? Ta-da! Now it turns out, this guy did not ever get a supply function. And he never got a demand function. He stopped there. Because he never examined cost. He says cost is irrelevant. He just said, now if you had a certain supply, if this was the amount of oranges there were that this person had, say right here, this was the amount of oranges the person had, like that, then that is what the person would pay for an orange, right? If there's that many oranges, they would only pay this for the last orange, no more. Or sorry, that would be the utility of their last orange. Now I can go on from there. He did something I don't want to really get into, I don't need to get into here, but he uses that in a way to get, the exchange between two individuals and what, the exchange of the two marginal utilities with two individuals to get a price without any supply, okay? That's where he goes. Now let's just see the problem with this. First of all, there's this serious problem. Utility and satisfaction, what's that all about? First of all, tell me what utility is. Well, how do you measure the utility? They didn't know. How do you measure utility? How do you do it? Well, you can't. How would you measure? If I said to you, how much utility did you get from that first orange? And you might say, like, I really, really liked that first orange. How much from the second? I really liked it. And how much from the third? I quite liked it. And how from the fourth? I sort of liked it. This is complete drivel. How can you use that to determine price? But tell me, I'm going to give you an orange. Tell me how much satisfaction you got from it. You can't, because you can't measure it. Now, in the modern world, maybe we could measure with electrocardiographs or something like that. The way, like a truth detector, like see how people sweat. I don't know, but basically in those days, there's no way you can measure it. You can't measure how you feel about something to the precision that we would need for a price, a specific price, right? That's number one. That's a real problem. The second problem is this. What is this stuff about satisfaction? As if human beings were so limited that they only were interested in pleasure and pain and satisfaction, but they're not. People, for example, you watch people eat and carry on and do things, and you say to them, are you enjoying that? And you stop and think about it. Well, actually, no, I'm not. You ask them about their relationships. Do you're with this relationship, you talk to them. I could probably take any one of you people and say, what is your relationship? Guys, this is the term for being involved with a woman. This is the term women use. I remember when one of my first girlfriends, she said to me, we're in a relationship. And I thought, good God, what the hell is that? That doesn't sound like a whole lot of fun. Let's get together and have a relationship. Let's get it on. Forget this relationship. But the thing was, I was kind of like, what? But anyway, it's a relationship, right? So, and you say this, and what relationship are you in? Oh, yes, I have this girlfriend, boyfriend, blah, blah, blah. And then the person starts bitching to you. They're not nice to me, they don't phone me up, they don't take me out. So how can you do with them then? Well, I love them, right? What do you mean I love them? You just told me a whole litany about what jerks they are. But the point is that this kind of emotional, and human emotion, not so simple to put down as satisfaction. And also humans are smart. You know, we don't just respond. I realize that if I put my hand in the fire, I burn. So I learned not to respond, I desire fire. No, you're going to burn yourself. So, no, it turns out it's too simplistic. It's way too simplistic. So basically, Marshall approached the first problem of measurement by basically cutting the Gordian knot. He said, I'll tell you how we're going to figure out how to measure this. We're just going to ask them, how much would you pay for it? We're going to measure utility in money. Now, we can't measure feeling in money, but we can measure what the person would pay. Now, this guy, I was telling this story to the other class. It's a kind of apocryphal story, which means it may or may not be true, but it's kind of told in economics circles. Bill Gates, when he's already a billionaire, is working late at night with his pals, and it's about 3 in the morning, and he wants a pizza. So he phones up the local Seattle pizza place, or wherever he is, and says, I'd like a pizza. And my pizza's like $50. And they say, well, sorry, we just closed 15 minutes ago. So he hangs up. And the people he's working with say, hey, Bill, you're the richest guy in the world. How much is a pizza worth to you? Why don't you phone that guy up and tell him you want a pizza? How much is it worth to you? So Bill Gates says, $152. But of course the thing is, and you could do that, if you thought about it, you could do that, but could you really say how much a pizza is worth to you? 152, 178, 146, right? So of course when he realizes it's worth 152, he just steps on the phone and says, I'll give you $50 for a pizza, get it over here. Sure, no problem. Right? There it is. So the point is, Marshall says, but really, we can kind of figure out, as we talked about from the beginning, how much a person will pay. I'll say, do you want this orange juice, or this orange? I'll give it to you for $50. No. I'll give it for 45, 40, 30, 32, 31, 10, 6, no. 5, no. 4, no. 3, 280, no. 275. Okay, right? So this is how much you'll pay, boom. So Marshall does that. He measured utility, which you can't measure, by the outward manifestation by what you would pay. So therefore he gets this. This is called the Marshallian demand curve. We've used it ever since. Measure marginal utility in money, in dollars, right? So this becomes price. And this becomes, lo and behold, a demand function. Because it tells you, it relates price to quantity demanded. According to this, but notice, for us, for Marshall, he got a demand function because he thought price, what a person would pay, changes with the quantity that they buy. So price for Marshall is in fact a function of quantity, which is why price is on the vertical axis for economics ever since. But now we don't do it that way. We do quantity as a function of price, but we never change the diet. Right? So this is called the derivation of demand from the principle of diminishing marginal utility, measuring marginal utility by price. The Marshallian demand curve, 1890. Actually did this by 1880. At Scarborough, they're really pleased with the course they have, which uses calculus. And they use marginal utility in that course, which is pitiful, because marginal utility is ultimately pitiful, in the sense that it's so weak, you can't, at the problem of measurement. And as we're going to see, as Marshall saw, there's a problem, because if you measure marginal utility in money, why is the problem? Money is itself a kind of commodity, which means for money, like every other commodity, what? Huh? Sorry? You have a certain valuation of money. In particular, it itself is susceptible to diminishing marginal utility. Which, by the way, if you listen to political science students, they'll say, this is diminishing returns. No, it is not. It's diminishing marginal utility, right? Diminishing returns is something else. So, but look at with money. For a student, $100 is probably worth quite a bit. You wouldn't just throw it. I said, let's go through the $100 bill. Actually, I might have to think about that, because $100 is worth something. But if you had like $1 million, who cares if you go to $100 bill, right? So what? The $100 to a millionaire might be worth $1, the same as $1 to a student. The more money you have, the less an additional unit of money is worth to you. So Marshall himself recognized the problem with this demand function is the measure of demand is corrupted because it itself changes in value with the quantity of money. Leave that for a moment, we'll come back to that later. All right? So, in the 1930s, and there's a kind of interesting evolution. Actually, Guy Fisher in 1890 was already doing it. 1896 did this in his PhD. But he was trying to prove that you could measure marginal utility, and he stumbled on the concept of indifference curves, which eventually became dominant in the 1930s. And what they are this: we take the issue of demand and we separate the concept of what your ability to buy something, your budget, from what you might like. So we separate as if we're window shopping from whether you can buy something or not. People in this room probably cannot buy a Mercedes-Benz, but people in this room can tell me whether they want a Mercedes or a Jaguar or a Honda or this or that, even though they might not be able to buy it. So separate those two ideas. And then secondly, do not worry about measuring that a Honda is worth, in a satisfaction point of view, or you would pay for, say, $30,000 for a Honda, or it has a satisfaction of $30,000, and a Mercedes has a satisfaction of $50,000. Forget about that, John. Just say this: I prefer a Mercedes to a Honda. And that is an unbelievable, simple assumption. Who can complain about that? We're going to build a theory which just assumes I prefer this to that, basically, and a couple of other very minor assumptions, as opposed to the huge assumption of I can measure how much I feel, how much I appreciate, how much I enjoy, how much I desire a Honda, and how much I desire a Mercedes. You can't do that, but you can tell me which one you prefer, and we're going to build a theory. Today, we're going to do the budget part, and after